How is it that schools of yesteryear seem to accomplish so much learning in so little time? I remember I've spoken to my grandfather. He's been in heaven for a number of years now. He only went to school through 8th grade, and yet the equivalent of his education that he received through the 8th grade far surpasses what many students today receive in K through 12. How is it that schools in the past could accomplish so much more? Those of you who are in charge of schools and in leadership positions, you're well aware of the fact that student deportment has a big impact on how much learning can take place in the classroom. My name is Josh Burks. I'm the Academy Administrator of Pensacola Christian Academy. I've been the administrator since 2012. I started teaching in 2000, so it's been roughly 20 years. I've been there at PCA. I started as a teacher and as a coach, junior high specifically, history and Bible. And as I worked with students, that first year was a learning experience for me. It seemed like I wanted a well-managed classroom, but I struggled to get there. The tips that I'm going to share with you today are some of the things that I've learned and that we share collectively with our teachers so that they can be effective in the classroom. James Madison, one of our founding fathers, made this statement one time. He said that government is necessary because men are not angels. That's an obviously true statement. It's profound though. Government is necessary because men are not angels. What he's referring to in the form of government is an external force that has a controlling influence on individuals. He didn't mean the government that we think of today. He's referring to an external controlling force. We all need that in our lives. We need accountability because we're not angelic. We are fallen, we have a sin nature, and we need some external accountability. So how can we as school administrators and teachers, how can we provide that for our classrooms so that learning can be productive and not distracted by deportment issues with our students? I trust that you'll find today's session helpful in that regard. I want to share a few thoughts before we start and get into some practical tips, and these are foundational. I want to share 3 couplets with you today. The first is this. Effective discipline involves training and restraining. Effective discipline involves training and restraining. You may think of Proverbs 22:6, which says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Training involves teaching. It's proactive. It's instruction. Sometimes teachers get frustrated when there are discipline problems in their classroom. But you know, if we're honest, we ought to expect it, because men aren't angels after all, and there is training that's involved. You would not expect a kindergarten teacher to inherit a group of students and expect them to already know how to read and how to write. No, that's their job. That's their responsibility, is to teach these students to read and to write. And throughout that process, there are assessments that take place to determine where they are on that scale of mastery of subject. Character is no different. We expect students to come to us with character flaws. And proactively, we will do some training so that when they are old, they'll continue to walk in that path. So training is teaching. It's not just reacting. Leaders, if you can help your teachers understand that, you could even tell them, I expect there to be discipline problems in your classroom. What I'm looking for from you is to proactively teach, to instruct in the way that's right, and then to respond appropriately. We call that restraining. 1 Samuel chapter 3 is one of the saddest verses in the Bible, I believe, as the Lord's talking to Samuel about Eli, and about Eli's sons specifically. You may remember that Eli's sons were wayward. They were rebellious. Eli himself was a good man, and yet Eli was judged because he did not restrain his sons. Here's what 1 Samuel 3:13 says about this. "For I have told him," the Lord referring to Eli, "that I will judge his house forever." Why? "For the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not." For the iniquity which he knoweth, his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. So he recognized that they were doing wrong, but he didn't step in to intervene. He didn't do anything about it. So administrators, our challenge is to encourage our teachers. We know that we'll have problems in the classroom. Be prepared proactively to teach what's right and then respond correctly when there's wrongdoing taking place. So restraining simply means preventing future misbehavior. It may be something as simple as a loss of a privilege. Maybe a student's a line leader and they lose that privilege to be a line leader. It may mean a time period of separation between them and their classmates. It may mean a phone call home to get parents involved. if it's of a more serious nature. So training and restraining. That's the first couplet. Effective discipline involves training and restraining. Effective discipline is also predicated upon what I consider our second couplet, unity and consistency. Unity and consistency. A well-disciplined school is that school in which there is a school-wide emphasis on the importance of learning and an intolerance for the conditions which prohibit learning. An intolerance for the conditions which prohibit learning. So we need to know the biblical mandate for discipline. Proverbs 29:15 says, the rod is the corrective measure. The reproof is the instruction behind that corrective measure. The rod and the reproof give wisdom. But a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. And if you've been in school leadership for any length of time, I'm sure that you could recognize the fulfillment of that passage many times. A child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. So we need to be unified on the structure of our discipline according to our school manual, our handbook. I hope that you have that written. I hope that you have that shared with your teachers so that they can benefit from that. So we're unified in that. We're also consistent in its application. Consistency is huge. This is what provides a safe feeling for students, where they know that no matter what happens, the response will be the same in love. Everyone handles it the same way every day. We create uniform expectations in that. So what type of rules should we have in our school? I'll say this, as few as possible to accomplish the desired end. They should be clear and they should be broad-based. Things like, don't get out of your seat without permission, or don't communicate without permission. Keep your eyes to the front. These are some very basic ones. All the other procedural steps that we take grow out of those basic expectations. And if those expectations are the same across all classes, students feel comfortable with those expectations. They feel safe. They feel confident. Handle every situation in a timely manner consistently before it leads to another situation. This is a biblical precept. Ecclesiastes 8:11 says this, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. I'll read it again. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Went to Walmart one time, and if you're familiar with how most Walmarts are set up, they have that opening area where the carts and the vending machines are. And I went to purchase a soda from the cheap ones. You know how they have the inexpensive generic brand, and then they have the name brands next to it. And so I went to the cheap soda machine. And as I was taking care of my business right there in front of that soda machine, that vending machine, I could see out of the corner of my eye, but I wasn't paying close attention to it, a lot of commotion right next to me, next to the name brand vending machine. And I looked over there, and this gentleman was taking a drink out of the little compartment at the bottom where the drink drops down and put it into his arm. And as soon as he would take one and put it in his arm, another one would drop down. He'd take that and put it in his arm, take that and put it in his arm. So he was filling his arm with these bottles of soda. And he had a grin on his face from ear to ear. And he looks over at me and he says, hey, it's handing out free drinks. Do you want one? Well, immediately I had an ethical situation to deal with. I knew that those drinks were the property of Walmart. I knew that I hadn't paid for those drinks. I suspected that he hadn't paid for those drinks either. And yet there's this common mindset amongst mankind, and that is, if I can get it, and I didn't purposefully break anything to get it, then it's my right to have it. And so sometimes I have shared that scenario with my students in my class. I said, hey, was that wrong for that gentleman to be taking those drinks without paying for them? And I get mixed responses. Some students will say, no, it's not wrong. It was their fault for having a broken machine. If they wanted him to pay for it, they should have fixed their machine. And others would say, well, no, it was wrong. He should have paid for them. We all know, if we're honest, what taking something that doesn't belong to us without paying for it and without permission is. It's called stealing. So I declined the offer, but when I went inside, I spoke to a representative from the store, and I said, hey, you may want to check one of your vending machines out there. It seems to be broken and handing out drinks. After I did my shopping and I left, I looked over there, and there was a bench right across from that vending machine. And there was an employee seated at that bench. I believe her arms were even crossed, and she was just watching that vending machine. She was standing guard. What was she doing? She was practicing out what James Madison had said years and years earlier. Government, that's an external force, is necessary because men are not angels. So that's where we find ourselves. We don't need to get upset about it. Often people look at school discipline and they kind of roll their eyes and they drop their chin and say, if it weren't for that, I'd be a great teacher. That's part of teaching. We're teaching character and we're teaching academics. They go hand in hand. We don't need to be discouraged when there's discipline problems. We know that that's coming. That's normal on this side of eternity. So we're prepared for it, and it's part of the building process. So unity and consistency, this is our second couplet. Proverbs 19:18 says, chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. That's just part of the training. That's part of the process. Unity and consistency is knowing and implementing the plan for discipline. And consistency is so important. I remember my first year teaching. I was green. I had a lot to learn. I had a lot of discipline problems in my classroom. They weren't major ones, but they were the type where students would talk out of turn, and there's just this general energy about the class that was distracting from the learning taking place. And I'd give consequences. I remember talking to our dean, and he remarked to me that, some of the veteran teachers, they don't give consequences and there are no discipline problems. I thought, well, how can that be? I'll share some of those tips with you in a few moments. But before I say that, back to the consistency part. My first year teaching, I had a student in my class who was a very good girl. She never got in trouble. And I knew her father well, very good family. And she was doing something that was clearly against the rules of the class that particular day. And so I addressed her and I said, please see me after class, I need to talk to you. And I may have even mentioned what the issue was. The whole time I'm thinking, what should I do? I know that I've stated that this is the rule, this is the penalty. I want to give grace, but I know that other students have been penalized for the same thing. How do I handle this equitably and fairly, consistently? Well, at the end of class, she came forward, as I told her to, and another student came forward, another girl, who was always in trouble. It seemed like she just thrived to be in trouble. She liked being in trouble. It's almost like she liked the extra attention of being in trouble. And she came up and she inserted herself right in this conversation, and she looked at this other girl and said, this is the consequence for doing what you just did. She named the consequence. And she just walked off. Most of us would think, that's none of her business. But I saw her as an angel from the Lord because I was struggling. What do I need to do? And she came up and in her own words basically said, Mr. Burks needs to be consistent. And I appreciated that. I was consistent. There were some tears, but you know what? She learned from it, and it was good. That's part of learning. The third couplet is this. Unity and consistency is the second. Command and control is the third. Effective discipline requires command and control. Command is being the right kind of authority. There's good kinds of authority. There's bad kinds of authority. How can I be the good kind? Romans 13 teaches us something about this. In Romans 13, verse number 1, the Apostle Paul says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. So those are the governing authorities. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So they'll be guilty. So God has put rulers in place. Now keep in mind, when Paul was writing this, he's writing to the church at Rome, and they had a very wicked and corrupt government. So he's referring to leaders who, humanly speaking, are corrupt, and yet he says God has given them certain authorities, and you are obligated to honor them. If I were to jump down to verse number 5, he goes on to say, wherefore ye must needs be subject. And here's the key. Not only for wrath, meaning not only for the consequences, to avoid the consequences, but also for conscience sake. So I need to submit myself to my authority, not because I'm scared of getting in trouble, but so that I can have a clear conscience. Have you ever heard a junior high student pray a prayer, something like this? Dear God, help us not to get in any trouble today. When they pray prayers like that, I love to come alongside and correct their prayer. how do you correct it? Maybe the prayer shouldn't be help us not get in trouble, which in essence means help us not to be caught, but rather help us do right so that we can have a clear conscience before you. So command, how can it be the right kind of authority? According to Romans 13, authority comes from God. So if I understand that my authority is given by God through me to my students, then I recognize that I have to deny myself. So authority comes from God. In order for me to be an executor of that authority, I have to deny myself. Think of a person in Scripture who didn't deny themselves. I think of Pontius Pilate. Do you remember when the Jews came to him, the religious leaders, and they wanted to crucify Jesus, and Pilate knew Jesus was innocent according to the law. So he had a dilemma. Either I execute an innocent man and I defy justice, or I let him free and I have protesters on my hands. What do I do? And so he was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. What Pilate tried to do was wash his hands of it and step away from the situation. But in reality, he didn't deny himself. He was trying to protect his own job rather than doing right. So authority comes from God. Authority denies himself. Authority represents God. To do this means we always discipline out of love because we're representing God. And God chastens out of love. So we have to chasten, discipline out of love. Do you know what that means? There are certain things, certain ways, certain methods that I cannot use in discipline. I cannot be sarcastic. I cannot be belittling. I can't belittle. I can't put someone down in my discipline. I can't be threatening. I can't be embarrassing. I found in my own life that when I come into class tired, physically tired, to teach, my methods are more prone to include those tactics than they are to follow God's ordained method. So I need to be careful. I need to be well rested. I need to represent Christ's love in my discipline. So I have command, I have control of my reactions. Ephesians and Colossians both speak to fathers about not provoking their children to wrath. Why? Because we as fathers, we as men, know that sometimes our reaction tends to be quick. It tends to be without compassion, without feeling. We're looking at it, we want results. We need to be careful about that. We're dealing with people. We're in control of our reactions. We're in control of the instructional climate. Remember, that's foundational to having a successful classroom. We're in control of our fears. What types of fears do you or your teachers have? Maybe a fear of being disliked by the students. I've had that fear. Or of being disliked by their parents. I've had that fear. Maybe a fear of losing control. When you realize, hey, I hope they never realize that there's one of me and 25 of them. If they choose to gang up on me, I'm in trouble. We can't let those kind of fears debilitate us. So command and control. Effective discipline requires these things. There's a verse that is one of my favorite verses when it comes to education. And it's from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. This is from Paul to young Timothy. He says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Those three things, as they guide our discipline, will guide us to success. No fear, power, love, a sound mind. That's what God gives to us. So administrators, let me share with you very quickly 10 tips that you can share with your teachers. These are tips that we share with our teachers. We put them into practice, and I personally have benefited from as I put them into practice in my own classrooms. So jot these down if you have an opportunity. Number one, learn your school policies and relate to them. Learn your school policies and relate to them. So you're sharing this with your teachers. They should know if this is the expectation and this is the consequence, that we're consistent across the board with its application. So learn our school policies and relate to them. By relating, I mean, as we talk to students and parents, we use pronouns such as we and our. We're together on this. Not they, it's their policy. It's the administration's policy. It's our policy. We're collective. We're in agreement on these. So learn your school policies and relate to them. Secondly, visualize yourself in calm control. I think of an Olympic slalom skier. As they sit at the top of the course, Right before they go down the course, their eyes are closed, their head may be tilting back slightly, a little bit at a time. They're thinking of the course. They're thinking of going past each of those flags. They know what's coming, and they're calmly in control of the course to go down that course. So calmly in control. This would be opposite to say how a contact sport like football, before they go out and take the field, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're chest bumping, they're fist bumping. In today's days of social distancing, maybe they're doing it from a distance. But they're doing these things, they're excited, they're trying to get their adrenaline ramped up. That's not what we're talking about here, calm control. If a student were to do this, this is what I would do. Yes, calm control. Number 3, model professionalism. Model professionalism. This is particularly difficult sometimes in a small setting, maybe a small classroom, where it's just a handful of students. It may be that you grew up with those students, or you've seen them grow up, they know you very well, you attend church together, and so there's this tendency to be chummy. I encourage you, have your teachers be friendly, but not chummy. You're not one of the gang. You're not one of their buds. There's definitely a difference between teacher and pupil. There needs to be some respect there. So model professionalism in all that they do. Number 4, dress appropriately. Dress appropriately. Help your teachers to see that how they dress is a reflection of who they are. And if we want our students to be professional, dressing professionally is part of that. We don't need to follow the latest trends and fashions just because. There's a certain element of professionalism that's expected in the workplace, and we're modeling that for our students to see. Try not to be too trendy, but not weird either. Modern, respectable, professional. Number 5, remain a mystery to your class. Remain a mystery to your class. If you have a teacher who's in a dating relationship, they don't need to share all the details of that relationship with their students. Here's what happens, and this is particularly important if there's a dating relationship between 2 members of your faculty, but it's true regardless if the other person's on the faculty. If the teacher comes in and shares the details with the students of, hey, this is what he did for me last night, this is what he gave to me, and they build this great relationship, and then all of a sudden the relationship comes to an end. If those students have a good relationship with the teacher, do you know what's going to happen? They're going to choose sides. And they're going to look at that individual as being, I can't believe that they broke my teacher's heart. And those students will actually hold a grudge against that individual if we've allowed ourselves to not be a mystery to our class. So remain a mystery. They don't need to know everything about my life. Enough to show that I'm human, I have human struggles, but not every single detail. They don't need to know all of that. So remain a mystery to your class. Number 6, set and keep your policies. Set and keep your policies. So enforcement is necessary. Why is it necessary? A policy not worth enforcing is a policy not worth having. A policy not worth enforcing is a policy not worth having. One unenforced policy is all it takes to undermine all the rest. My master's degree was in history education, and one of my large projects that I did for that master's degree was I studied out what was called the Whiskey Rebellion back in 1794. You may or may not have heard of it. Essentially, there was a new tax that the government placed on corn and grain, and the farmers in western Pennsylvania protested, and they had an uprising because of that tax. So this is one of the challenges that President Washington had to face as the new commander-in-chief. And the big question was, what will he do with this uprising in western Pennsylvania? These farmers who are upset, and perhaps justly so, over a tax that was not reasonable for them. That was their livelihood. And so the approach that he took was to enforce the policy. He said, I'm the executive branch. I don't make the laws, I enforce them. So if you'd like a law to be changed, then change it the right way. But until that's changed the right way, it's my job to enforce it. And so he basically said, look, you talk to Congress. Congress is the one who passed that law. They need to change it. But while it stands, I'm going to make sure that it's enforced. Because he understood this principle. One unenforced policy is all it takes to undermine all the rest. If, through protests and through an uprising, we can overthrow one, then that's the example and the pattern that's been set for others. If we don't like it, we'll just throw a big temper tantrum and we'll overthrow another one. So he set that example for us. We can help our students learn character by setting and keeping our policies. Number 7, learn to see what's happening while you teach. Learn to see what's happening while you teach. As you are observing your teachers in their classrooms, how much eye contact are they making with their students? They should be making a great deal of eye contact. If their heads are buried in their books and their notes, if they're working on things and their students are doing their own thing, they're not properly assessing the progress the students are making. And they're probably not catching the wrongdoing that may be going on. We're setting an environment where the students are tempted to do wrong. And so learn to see what's happening while you teach. This comes by being fully prepared to know what I'm going to teach before I teach it. Number 8, catch the first offender. And this is key. This is so key. If a teacher catches the third or the fourth offender, what do the students assume? They assume that teacher knew who the first and the second offender were. The students did. They knew who it was. They assumed the teacher knew the same thing but intentionally ignored it and chose then to catch the third or fourth. And so they think the teacher's playing favorites. Either that or they think the teacher is completely inept. Either one is not a good situation. So catch the first offender. Here's what I do with my class sometimes. If I know that there will be a propensity to do wrong, I will actually be looking for that first one because I want to make sure I get the first one and not the second one. I want to handle things right. And so I'm looking for it. Number 9, teach students to respond properly to correction. When we correct them, this is the training, the restraining. When we correct them, we want them to have a right response to God-given authority. Not to me, personally. It's not Mr. Burks' pride that's in question. No, it's God's authority. So we want to teach them to respond correctly. So if they throw a fit, if they slam their books down, if they roll their eyes, if they huff and they puff and they drop their shoulders, if there's clearly disrespect, we start over again because they need to respond properly to correction. And number 10, the last tip to share with your teachers, I encourage you to share this. Recognize students doing right. That is, after all, what we're looking for. And just like we recognize students who excel academically, we want to recognize students who are excelling with their character. Now, depending on what age they are, you'll do this differently. In kindergarten, for instance, young people like public praise. And it builds a positive spirit in the classroom. If a teacher tries to publicly praise a student in high school, that won't go over well. Private praise does wonders with students as they get older into their adolescent years. Okay, so these are 10 tips to share with your teachers. I also have 5 tips to share with you as school leaders, as administrators. If discipline comes to my attention, how should I handle it? And the first is this: be prompt. Be prompt. Do it quickly. Don't let things sit for a number of days. Yes, it will interrupt your schedule, but that leads me to my second point, and that is give it a high priority. Give it a high priority. It's unfortunate that these interruptions come, but that's just par for the course. It's part of our territory. So give it a high priority so that we can be prompt and deal with it right away. It goes back to the Ecclesiastes 8:11 principle. We want to execute judgment quickly so that the heart of the sons of men is not set in them to do evil continually. Number 3, do your homework. Do your homework. Get all of the facts. If a student comes to you with a report or a teacher comes to you with a report, it may be really convincing and it may sound like all the pieces are there. Do your homework. Find out what the other side is. There's probably more information that you do need to know so that you can make an accurate decision. Number 4, make a decision. Don't waffle. Make the decision. To the best of your ability, with prayer, and by God's grace and with His wisdom, make a decision. You need to, for the benefit of your school and the student body and the department. And then lastly, keep a written record of your decision. Keep a written record. Now, I'm not referring to putting something in their cume folder so that it's with them for the rest of their lives. They don't need to be saddled with every little discipline situation that they went through as a student. But internally, for your purposes, keep a written record so that you can have it to compare in the years to come, so that you can have, in similar situations, similar applications of your policies. I trust this has been encouragement to you. We're looking forward to having a great year. I realize some of us may be more distant than we desire. We may be working remotely, and some of these principles maybe have to be applied remotely as well. But nevertheless, God bless you as you continue to serve Him, as you train your students in both character and academics.